Well, Kevin McCarthy's Republican-controlled House of Representatives has now accomplished exactly two things, and only two things. And neither of those two things benefits Kevin McCarthy's constituents in California, in his California congressional district, or anyone else in the country. Kevin McCarthy's Republican House of Representatives has passed no legislation that will ever become law. They have passed bills, but none of it will ever come to a vote in the United States Senate. And so Kevin McCarthy's House of Representatives has been passing bills that will be never heard from again, including a bill to defund the police. One of the very first legislative actions taken by Kevin McCarthy's Republican House of Representatives under his leadership was to defund the police. The police, Kevin McCarthy got all Republicans to vote to defund, are the tax police, the Internal Revenue Service. The Internal Revenue Service is the profit center of the American government. Every worker in the IRS is paid a salary like all other government workers. But unlike other government workers, people working in the IRS spend all day bringing money into the Treasury of the United States of America. Massive amounts of money. So Kevin McCarthy's legislation to defund the Internal Revenue Service has been formally scored by the Congressional Budget Office to increase the budget deficit by $100 billion. And it will continue to increase the budget deficit by hundreds of billions of dollars into the future infinitely if it ever becomes law. Cutting the payroll at the IRS will not save the United States government one penny. It is impossible to save the government money by cutting the payroll at that one place, at the IRS. It will actually cost the government hundreds of billions of dollars over time, forever into the future, by cutting that payroll, because people who want to illegally avoid paying taxes would be able to do that with an Internal Revenue Service whose personnel have been cut so dramatically by Republicans that real law enforcement of the tax code is not possible at the Internal Revenue Service. That is not a new concept. Since the Internal Revenue Service was created, Washington has known that the more people we have at the IRS working on tax collection, the more tax money will be collected. Legal tax money required to be paid by law. Republicans do not want Americans, especially rich Republicans, to have to actually comply with tax law. It is as if the Republican Party wants separate traffic rules for rich Republican drivers. Rich Republican drivers don't have to come to a full stop at stop signs. Rich Republican drivers do not have to come to a stop at red lights. If rich Republican drivers have highly engineered German cars designed for the Autobahn that they personally believe are safe at 120 miles per hour, then rich Republican drivers can drive at 120 miles per hour, but working single mothers driving to their second or third job of the day must comply with the speed limit. That is the Republican concept of tax law. The only part of the tax code that Republicans want strictly enforced is the earned income tax credit, which goes to poor working families with children. And so Kevin McCarthy, who now says we must get the budget deficit under control in order to agree to raise the government's debt limit, has passed a bill through the Republican House of Representatives to dramatically increase the deficit by hundreds of billions of dollars going into the future by making sure that tax law cannot be enforced against our richest taxpayers. But because Democrats still control the United States Senate, that bill will never become law, which brings us to the only two accomplishments achieved by a floor vote in Kevin McCarthy's House of Representatives. The first was the election of Kevin McCarthy on the House floor as the Speaker of the House. That took 15 ballots, but he got that done. And the second was today, when Kevin McCarthy brought another personnel matter to a floor vote in the House of Representatives. Kevin McCarthy got the Republicans in the House of Representatives to vote to remove one of the 50 members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
Is anyone surprised that I am being targeted? Is anyone surprised that I am somehow deemed unworthy to speak about American foreign policy? Or that they see me as a powerful voice that needs to be silenced? Frankly, it is expected, because when you push power, power pushes back.
In a New York Times op-ed titled "When Ilhan Omar Asks Questions, Her Colleagues Should Listen," Peter Barnhart says Representative Omar is, quote, the only person who consistently describes American foreign policy as it is experienced by much of the rest of the world. What Ms. Omar has done is extraordinary. She opposes the myth which frames so much of official discourse in Washington that American foreign policy is intrinsically moral. Ms. Omar's detractors might say all this reflects her anti-Americanism. They're wrong. Ms. Omar speaks idealistically about the moral authority the United States carries on the world stage when we stand up for human rights. Across the world, many people encounter American foreign policy when they see a drone flying overhead, a hospital that U.S. sanctions have deprived of medicine, or a dictator's troops carrying American-made guns. Ms. Omar asks the kinds of questions that these non-Americans, whether they reside in Pakistan, Cuba, or Cameroon, might ask. She translates between Washington and the outside world. Representative Omar is the only African-born member of the House of Representatives. At age 9, she became a refugee from Somalia, living in a refugee camp in Kenya. She reached the United States at age 12 with her family and eventually settled in Minnesota, where she won an election to the House of Representatives in 2018.
I will continue to speak up for little kids who wonder who's speaking up for them. I will continue to speak up for families around the world who are seeking justice, whether they are displaced in refugee camps or they are hiding under their beds somewhere like I was, waiting for the bullets to stop. Because this child, survivor of war, would have wanted that. The 9-year-old me would be disappointed if I didn't talk about the victims of conflict. I didn't come to Congress to be silent. I came to Congress to be their voice. And my leadership and voice will not be diminished if I am not on this committee for one term. My voice will get louder and stronger, and my leadership will be celebrated around the world as it has been.
Representative Dean Phillips of Minnesota compared the Republican accusations of anti-Semitism against Representative Omar, for a comment for which she's apologized, to the conduct of Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar.
She has never posted a video depicting herself decapitating and killing fellow members of Congress. She doesn't question whether a plane really smashed into the Pentagon on 9/11. She does not wonder if school shootings in America are staged. She has not propagated the absurd notion that space lasers financed by the Rothschild family are the cause of wildfires in California. She has never equated vaccine mandates with Adolf Hitler. And she has never, ever expressed support for executing leaders of the United States Congress.
Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, whose life was threatened in a tweet by Republican Paul Gosar, said this.
I had a member of the Republican caucus threaten my life, and you all and the Republican caucus rewarded him with one of the most prestigious committee assignments in this Congress. Don't tell me this is about consistency. Don't tell me that this is about a condemnation of anti-Semitic remarks when you have a member of the Republican caucus who has talked about Jewish space lasers and an entire amount of tropes, and also elevated her to some of the highest committee assignments in this body. This is about targeting women of color in the United States of America. Don't tell me, because I didn't get a single apology when my life was threatened. Thank you.
After that vote in the House, the Congressional Black Caucus went to the Oval Office to meet with the president and the vice president to discuss Vice President Kamala Harris's statement at the funeral of Tyree Nichols in Memphis on Wednesday that they must find a way to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act.
We have agreement on how we will continue to work forward, both from a legislative standpoint as well as executive and community-based solutions, but the focus will always be on public safety. Public safety for all communities, because we understand that it is about the culture of policing and keeping all communities safe. And all of us should be able to agree that bad policing has no place in any American city or community.